Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving deep into the Cushman Report. We're going to break down how a series of very specific choices managed to push an entire school district right to the edge of financial collapse and then right into a state takeover.
So, let's start with the event that set off all the alarm bells. A city's school committee having its financial power stripped away. I mean, that's a huge deal. It's a drastic step for the most severe kinds of crises. But here's the thing. This wasn't some sudden disaster. It was actually the predictable final chapter of a story that had been unfolding for years. So how on earth does something like this happen? How does a school district end up in a complete fiscal freefall? Well, that is the big question. And to find the answer, we're going to follow the evidence that's laid out in the report, which calls this whole thing a crisis of choice.
Okay, so to really get to the heart of the problem, we first need to understand this fundamental, massive disconnect between what was really happening in the district and how it was spending its money.
Let me put it to you this way. Think about your own family. When your kids grow up and move out, you don't keep paying to heat and clean a giant 5-bedroom house, right? It just doesn't make any financial sense. You downsize. But what if, instead of downsizing, you decided to hire more housekeepers for that empty house? That, in a nutshell, is exactly what we're talking about here.
And when we actually look at the numbers, that contradiction becomes, well, it becomes impossible to ignore. You see this startling paradox between how many kids were actually in the classrooms and how many adults were on the payroll.
Look at this. The disconnect is just staggering. Between 2020 and 2025, the district lost nearly 1,000 students. That is a huge drop. And yet, during that exact same time, it added 24 staff members. The student body shrank by almost 11%, but the workforce actually grew.
This just defies all basic logic, and it raises the really obvious question, the one you're probably asking yourself right now. Where in the world did the money come from to pay for more staff, for fewer students?
Well, the answer lies in a massive but, and this is the key word, temporary flood of federal money. It was a lifeline that wasn't really used as a lifeline, but more like a crutch to avoid facing the district's really deep structural problems.
The district got its hands on over $19 million in one-time federal COVID relief money. You might have heard of it. It's called ESSER funds. This was a financial windfall that was supposed to help schools deal with the impacts of the pandemic.
But here's the absolutely crucial part. These were one-time funds. They were never meant to cover permanent, ongoing costs like salaries. And yet, that's exactly how the district used them, to prop up staffing levels that were already way too high for the number of students they had.
And you can see just how dependent they got. It peaked in fiscal year 2022. The district burned through $9.5 million. That's nearly half of its entire COVID relief money in just 1 year. This wasn't just patching a hole in the budget, this was funding a payroll the district simply could not afford.
So what this federal money really did was mask the underlying crisis. It let the leadership kick the can down the road to put off the hard but absolutely necessary choice to downsize and align its staff with its actual student population. And it's not like they weren't warned. I mean, right in the middle of that peak spending year, the district's very own superintendent, Philip Thornton, he put it in black and white. He made it crystal clear that using temporary money to pay for permanent overstaffing was going to lead to an inevitable deficit.
So what happened next is just critical to understanding this whole mess. The warning wasn't just ignored. The person who delivered it was effectively forced out of his job. And then the district just doubled down, continuing to use temporary money to fund a permanent payroll problem.
So this all leads to the inevitable day of reckoning. You know, that moment when the temporary money finally runs out, but the permanent expenses are all still there. This wasn't a crisis that happened by chance. As the report says, it was a crisis of choice.
This timeline just lays it all out perfectly. In 2021, the SSR money starts flowing, hiding the real problem. By 2022, spending is peaking to prop up staff. Then in 2024, the funds run out, exposing this massive hole in the budget. And by 2025, the crisis is so bad, the state has no choice but to step in.
And the cost of making these choices? It's just staggering. The report estimates that from 2020 to 2025, the decision to actually grow the staff despite that falling enrollment cost the district over $80 million in excess spending.
The report's author actually gives this a name. He calls it the mismanagement tax. And it's this idea that every single dollar that was wasted on an overstaffed system
is a dollar that was taken directly from taxpayers, a burden they had to carry for a crisis that leadership created.
And the central argument of the entire report is really captured in this one powerful quote. This wasn't some unavoidable disaster, right? It was a direct result of a series of decisions to ignore reality, to misuse funds, and to disregard clear warnings.
And so, this explainer of the Kushner report really leaves us all with a critical question, one that every community should probably be asking. When leadership chooses to ignore the facts and the temporary fixes finally run out, who is it that ultimately pays the price? Well, it's the students, it's the teachers, and it's the taxpayers.